Welcome to Harmony Talk, a podcast about dreamers and doers. Here, people from all walks of life tell us about their dreams, how they fulfilled them, and the moment they knew there was no turning back. This podcast is sponsored by A.M. Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm your host, Todd Stevens. My guest today is a visual artist gifted with knowing exactly what she wanted to do with her life very early in her years. Heather Clements grew up in Northern Virginia and pursued her passion for the arts, graduating cum laude from the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. Her path led her to the Florida Panhandle, where she launched her professional art career, owned a gallery, and motivated one journalist to write, "No one I know is doing more for local art and artists than Heather Clements." After the devastation of Hurricane Michael, she did some soul-searching and eventually relocated to Asheville, North Carolina, where she would again witness the unmatched power of Mother Nature. Heather is an award-winning, multifaceted artist who excels in watercolor, painting, mixed media, and interactive art as evidenced by her new book, Pull Me Apart, which uses paper layering and creates an immersive experience for the viewer. She's also created some of the most breathtaking murals, even incorporating an interactive touch to some, if you can imagine that. Heather has partnered with global brands including IKEA, and her art appears in galleries and museums across the country from California to Massachusetts. Heather Clements, welcome to the program.
Hi, wow, what an intro. I'm so used to writing these bios. I'm not used to hearing someone summarize them out loud. So that's cool.
Well, thank you very much. You have such a broad area of experience in art. It's difficult to summarize any shorter than that. So kudos to you. And again, we're honored to have you on the program today, Heather.
Well, thank you. I'm very honored to be here.
Well, this is a podcast about dreamers and doers, and so rarely do you find someone who seems to have had a calling for their life's passion so early in their life. I've got to ask you, I don't know what that's like, and I'm sure many other people don't. So what's it like to have that calling and be able to follow that dream from such a young age?
I guess it's hard to say because I don't know what to compare it to. I haven't had it any other way, but I suppose that was one thing in my life that was always really simple. Like, I know what I want to do. It's just, how do I do that? And I remember when I went to art school that I thought that everybody else was going to be just like me, that they'd always wanted to be an artist. But that was actually pretty rare. Sure, there were other people that were like that, but for the most part, people had just kind of figured it out within the last few years. Some of them were like, I don't know, I just decided, 6 months ago. But yeah, like I said, I think it's just like taken one factor of indecision out of my life because I always just wanted to do art.
I heard your mother once say that, you even colored within the lines at a very young age. So that was something you took a talent to very, very quickly.
Yeah, for as long as I can remember, I've just always loved drawing. Almost every kid loves drawing, right? I probably just liked it more than the average, and I just never stopped.
Oh, that's wonderful. And was there ever a moment where you doubted that passion and thought, geez, I think I might need to pursue another path because of income expectations or livelihood or any of those factors? Or did you just keep on going?
I mostly just kept on going. I was told, my entire childhood, oh, you'll probably be a starving artist. And I was like, all right, okay. And so I figured I would either make art and literally be starving in the crappiest little non-livable space ever, or I thought maybe I'll have a day job and hopefully have enough energy at the end of the day to make art. But that was always extremely unappealing, of course, maybe because I just don't have that much energy. I don't think I would be able to come home after an office job and then create paintings or something. So I've always had expectations of not making much of a living. And also, growing up before the age of social media, I wasn't exposed to living artists. The only artists that I knew of were famous and dead. So it was especially hard to picture what it would be like to make a living as an artist in this day and age, without patrons and all of this other stuff. So that's something that I just kind of had to figure it out. And when I started making my living as an artist, I didn't know anybody else who did it. I was just kind of trying it. And I've been trying it ever since. And it's been almost 15 years.
Well, you're fortunate in that regard. And doing it for so long, I have to ask, growing up and that being your passion, was your family always supportive of you pursuing art as a career?
Yes, they were. And so that's definitely a part of why it's able to work because my dad passed away last year. He was a musician his entire life. That's all he ever did and all he ever wanted to do. He did do a little bit of art on the side and he loved art. And so he was like my first art teacher and art inspiration. And so he was always very encouraging. And my mom was encouraging of his career. And so then, therefore, mine as well. So, yeah, I was very fortunate that both of my parents were like, yeah, do art. So I did.
So I have to assume that if I asked, who your inspirations were when you began, your art career and to this day, well, I'll ask you that. Who are your inspirations when you create art?
It's always such a tough question because it's always changing. But when I was younger, I was definitely really influenced by Chuck Close. He did those really, really large scale, originally photorealistic portraits. And then eventually he became paraplegic. And so then he did like these large grid work portraits with like different colored circles in each square, but then you back up and it's this amazing portrait. But I was really inspired by the fact that he was depicting just like real people and every little wrinkle and mole and stray hair. And I found that really beautiful. So I've kind of kept that like appreciation for just like representing people real and as they are. And sometimes I allow myself to really get into the nitty gritty details. But there's so many other artists. When I was into paper cutting, I was really inspired by Elsa Mora, William Kentridge. He does charcoal animations. He's a phenomenal artist. And oh gosh, there's so many. I could go on for another hour or two, but I'll probably stop at that, I guess, for now.
And I imagine art school exposes you to artists that you never even considered or had any exposure to in the past. And I have to ask you, because I know art school from people that I've heard, it can be a grueling process. And some people just, take on art for art's sake, and some, like yourself, pursue that in education. And I assume along the path, there must have been some criticisms, and I'm sure that's all part of the process. And I wanted to ask you, how do you deal with criticism, particularly at the art school level, that doesn't just, take you down at the knees, so to speak?
Well, like it did some. You definitely develop a very thick skin in art school. So, like, now you kind of can't hurt my feelings about my art. You can hurt my feelings about plenty of other things, but probably not about my art. It's definitely an adjustment, especially, when you're a kid growing up, pretty much everybody around you, if you're good at art to a certain extent, they're going to be like, oh, you're great at art. Yay, the end. Right. But then you go to art school and it's not just shining encouragement of a kid doing art. It's like real critiques. I've told this story before, but I've had a guest artist and he was like sort of a famous artist at the time. And I was a junior in art school at this point, and he pretty much told me I shouldn't be an artist. He wasn't just like, your painting's bad. He was like, you should maybe do other things in life. And that was very memorable, very crushing. I went home and cried my little eyes out. So, there's plenty of that in art school. And it wasn't all like that bad. This was a particularly bad case. But, I stuck with it anyway.
I have to ask, does that motivate you, or did that motivate you in that moment?
No, it didn't motivate me, but it also didn't demotivate me, I was temporarily crushed by it, but at the same time, like, what else was I gonna do? I didn't really consider not doing art anymore because that's just like not in my brain. I was just like, well, I'm still gonna make art and he's just one guy, but maybe that painting's bad. I don't know. Like, get better, basically. But I don't think it particularly motivated me. Some people are like, oh, did the spite of him make you want to do it more? Like, no, art's just what I do. So I'm just going to keep doing it.
I love it. It sounds like it's really an extension of yourself.
If I don't make art, if I'm not making art, I'm a very unhappy blob of nothingness.
That's quite a statement, but certainly understand. I think you've said of your early work, speaking of making art as an extension of yourself, some of it kind of came from a dark place. I think you've also said, a lot of it was really about finding yourself, searching for who you were. What did you find?
Oh, yeah, all sorts of surprises. I think introspection, I think knowing yourself is so vastly important to your own happiness and then in extension to how you treat the people in the world around you. And so I think it's an important step that ideally we all go through. And art for me definitely helped me vastly with that. Like, for me personally, I didn't have a therapist. I had my art and I allowed that to be my therapy. And so I was, constantly learning new things about myself and kind of working through my issues. And I would even have themes going on in my art that my conscious mind wasn't aware of at first for a while, that like after the fact I would realize, oh, that's what this is about. I didn't even know that. So, there was something about being open to creating this art that was working on a deeper level than I was even aware of at the time.
Wow, you stole my next question, which is art therapeutic to you?
Oh my gosh, so much. And yeah, and I've told this story as well, but after Hurricane Michael, which if people don't know, it didn't get a lot of publicity, so a lot of people don't know that much about it, but it was in 2018, Florida Panhandle, and it was a category 5. It destroyed 70 to 90% of the trees, like a couple million acres. And we hardly knew anybody who didn't have at least decent damage, if not complete destruction to their homes. Like it was a real bad one, and it half destroyed our home. And we were like kind of different levels of displacement for like 3 years. But the loss of nature was like this huge, huge loss. And then, like, after the hurricane, a couple weeks later, one of my close friends passed away of cancer. A couple months after that, my dog, who was like my best friend and soulmate, he passed away. I just had other really terrible, it was the worst year. And I was in such a deep depression and I wasn't making any art. I had like no motivation to, just couldn't do it. I was a miserable blob of nothingness, is what I was that year. And, I was like, I need to get out of this for myself as well as the people around me, my family. I need to be a better existence for them. So I ended up creating a solo artist residency, I suppose, because I had gotten rejected when I applied to other ones. And I was like, screw it, I'll do my own. So I booked a small treehouse cabin in the woods of North Georgia in the mountains for a week. And I just brought a whole bunch of art supplies with me. And I was like hoping to try to make some art and be in some nature, because nature is my biggest inspiration. And all the nature around us was just destroyed. And so I didn't really know how it would go. I was just like, I just have to try. But, my biggest fear was I was ditching my family to go cry by myself for a week. But I didn't. And I didn't have internet. So there was no binge watching or anything to like take my mind off of all my troubles or whatever. So I hiked a little bit every day and I made art every day. And it was the first art that I had made. And it was very personal art. And it was very much about all of the losses. And completely unexpectedly, I came out of my depression in a week. That wasn't my goal. My goal was like, hopefully I'll make art and I'll start to get kind of better. But I like completely got out of this depression in this week of connecting with the nature and myself and my art. And there's been hard times since then, but I can say that like that level and duration of depression, like that's never been back ever since. So everybody should spend more time in nature and make some more art.
Sure, absolutely. You mentioned being away from your family for that period of time and the isolation, time alone with your thoughts. What does that do to your psyche?
Well, I think it's something that we all often avoid, and that's why we have so many distractions. And don't get me wrong, I love me some distractions sometimes, but it can get to a point where you're just avoiding things. So it's very uncomfortable at first and it's scary and it's not a fun process, but the healing that can come out of that makes it worth it.
You seem like someone who's very adaptable to change. That's such a great quality because I know you, coming out of college, you just took a trip to Florida. We just spoke about Florida and Hurricane Michael. And then for some reason, you just decided to stay. But you basically made that decision on that trip, just coming out of college. Is that accurate?
Yeah, sort of. My college roommate and I were like, what are we going to do? And I went through all of art school, like, I'm making art. And then it was like, how do you make a living from it? I don't know. No clue. So I had applied to like museums and galleries in Baltimore and DC because that's all I knew. These are art things. I don't know. But, I didn't get any of those, of course. And I had my high school, or actually middle school friend, was moving to Florida for a job. And I was like, I got nothing going on. I like the beach. And I was saying it as a joke, but she was like, no, you should. And then like one thing led to another. And my roommate and then my old friend and I, the three of us just moved down to Florida. And I ended up owning an art gallery down there. And then I met my now husband, and that's what kept us there for so long. And then after the hurricane is when we decided that we wanted to leave to go to somewhere that had more nature, more art, and less hurricanes. That didn't work out very well, the no hurricane thing. So then that's when we decided to move to Asheville, but we waited and worked towards it, waited until my stepson graduated high school and moved off to college. And then we drove up and moved to Asheville.
I don't know if you call it ironic, coincidental. And then Asheville, of course, suffers as well. And you lived through that. And I know I saw some photos of you in a gallery space after that terrible storm came through. I can't imagine the hours that went into creating all of the things placed there and so much damage done. What's the first step in recovering from all that, having kind of been there before for you?
Yeah, it was interesting since going through it before. At first, I was like, I'll be more resilient than last time. And then I felt very much not so because all that trauma was coming back and all that helplessness and everything. And then there was all of this witnessing of all of these people going through the same thing that we had been through a handful of years ago and not wanting to tell people what was coming. Like at first, after a major hurricane, if you know, there's a honeymoon phase of I'm so thankful to be alive and look at how amazing our community is. We're all coming together. We're helping each other out. And this group effort, it is beautiful and inspiring. And that's awesome. But it's a honeymoon phase also because you start to realize how long the recovery truly is, that it's not going to be like a few weeks of hard work and then everything's back to normal. I don't know if the steps are really linear and everybody's situation is so different as well. But, definitely self-care and feeling your feels is extremely important. And I'm doing better from this one than I was the last one. So I think I've tried very hard to hang on to the lessons learned from the first one, I suppose, and apply that to how I react to this one. And I do think that it's helped a lot, but also I am more fortunate than some in that this time my house wasn't destroyed. Last time it was, and this time it wasn't. The gallery that I was a part of was destroyed, and that's extremely difficult, but I was fortunate enough to save some of my art beforehand, and that's more than I can say for a lot of artists that lost a lifetime worth of art and supplies, as well as their space for future income as well. So there's just so much.
Sure. The loss of art and the space, as you mentioned, on top of the loss of homes and property and unfortunately, in some situations, life. And we've seen it in Florida. We've seen it in North Carolina. We're seeing it now in California. Certainly many people to think about and keep in our prayers in these situations, I know. So I want to talk about happy stuff, though. I want to talk about your art. I commend you for getting through what you've gotten through and being so resilient. It's certainly admirable to say the least. But I have to tell our listeners, too, if you're enjoying our conversation today, my conversation with Heather, I invite you to visit HarmonyTALKpodcast.com, and you'll hear other inspiring stories of dreamers and doers. So going through what you've gone through, it's no wonder that so much of your work, is connected to the environment. And there's so much messaging in that work. And I don't know, when I was looking at many of your pieces, I think I'm really looking at a story here. I'm not just looking at a piece of art. I wonder if you think like that as an artist. And if so, do you think, here's the story and I want to create a visual, or here's a visual and I want it to tell a story?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't think that a lot of my work is directly narrative, but then again, the interactive stuff does become more narrative. It's always so hard to describe like the creative process, but it's kind of just like one thing adds on to another. And then there's an interesting juxtaposition and what can I do with that? And the nature influence has been, the main thing in my art for, I don't know, probably at least a dozen years. And it's interesting how much that's changed and evolved. Originally, my art, I suppose it was a simple story. It was how we destroy nature and use it for like superficial purposes. And that didn't last long because I was like, I think a message is better received in the positive. And I think that there's so much concentration on the destruction we have on our planet. And like, yes, we should know that, but I don't think enough attention is paid to the positives of having a connection with the environment and with taking care of it and the wholeness that brings us. And so for a long time, that was really the overarching premise of my work, was the beautiful connection between ourselves and nature. And then I've been a big sketchbooker, which is very much where all bets are off, anything can happen. Weird stuff, dark stuff, funny stuff, all the everything and in between. And yeah, one day I decided to make a sketchbook that had like a more specific goal, and that was to combine paper cutting and watercolor in a sketchbook. And that was it. And so I got like a slightly nicer quality paper. And then I started making these interactive things. I forget, I think the first interactive I had was like, I cut the eyes out of a portrait and then made mushrooms that came out of them. And you push and pull these little tabs to make the mushrooms go higher and lower. And I was just like endlessly entertained by the fact that my art was moving. And so it was just like one thing kept going to another. And originally, this book was what I made in my free time. Like, this wasn't my main art concentration. This was like a just for me. This is what I do on the weekends, just total random fun stuff. And then I posted videos of it and it went sort of viral. And everybody was like, oh my God, I want to buy one. And I'm like, you can't buy this. This is mine, guys.
It's this thick, right? I saw you.
Yeah, it's pretty thick. I was like, and it's just mine. Like, it's not for sale. And also I can't publish this. Like, how would you publish this interactive book? But then came this publisher, Proposition Press, and they do fine art books only. That's their whole thing, or fine art pop-up books only. So we actually kind of reached out to each other on the same day. Like, I think I emailed them and they Facebooked me or vice versa. And then we published this book, and now I keep making interactive art and I just really love it. And then I had started doing murals several years ago, and then one day I was like, oh my gosh, what if I combine murals with interactive art? And so last year I started doing that, and my husband helps build them. And so we made, I think, 3 big interactive murals last year and 1 small interactive piece. That one got flooded away. And I've got, another interactive mural in the works. And so that's been endlessly entertaining. And the reaction from people is pretty awesome too, because I've never let money dictate what I do. Like, obviously I'm an artist, but also, like, I could have been painting like pretty sunset scenes and made many more sales. Scenes are totally fine if that's what you want to do, but it wasn't what I really wanted to do. And so I felt like I was doing what I really wanted to for many, many, many years. But then doing this interactive sketchbook was just a little bit of another level of like, I know I'll never sell this. This is entirely for me. And so it was weirder and at times darker than my other stuff still. And that is what people seem to be connecting with even more. And so I really love that the art, the things that we create that we personally most want to make, no matter how weird or dark or whatever it is, that's what the most people connect with. And so I think it's a good example of how connected we really are. I'm not making things for them. I'm making it for me. And they happen to also connect with that in their inner weirdos and inner macabre loving selves.
That's wonderful. I love the inner weirdo, and I've seen where you've used that before. You touched on so many things. Your murals, I invite everyone again to go to heatherclementsart.com. Because, when I first saw your first interactive mural, I was clearly like, wow, you see murals. Yes, they're wonderful when you see them, but to actually be able to interact with a mural, I think about the wings that they have in different cities, the angel wings. And I was staying in Nashville, I think, one time, and I could see that from my hotel room. And the line for people to get their picture taken was probably 50 people long. It's an interactive mural, really, is what it is. But yours actually has moving parts, which has really taken this to the next level. So again, I encourage people to take a look at that. And, when you talk about the inner weirdo, I love that phrase, because I think we all feel we have a certain level of weirdo. I guess the question is, who judges what and who's weird?
For sure. And weird is such an interesting concept because what is it? Like, by definition, something that's like not normal, but like, who's normal? Like, what is that? These are all made up terms and, normal's boring anyway. So
very conforming, isn't it? If art were normal, everything would be black and white and there would be no other colors, right? Or pictures, according to society. And the other thing I want to touch on that you mentioned, you're talking about the interactive book. And again, it's called Pull Me Apart, which I love the play on words. How did you arrive at that?
The name for it? Well, I realized that a lot of the portraits in the book were of me, partially because, well, let's see, I think I was still isolating from the pandemic. I isolated for a very long time. So I'm around a lot. And a lot of times I would have this idea really quickly. And like, I didn't want to like schedule photographing a model or something. I just wanted to make it now. And so I would just, take photos of myself or work from a mirror. And they were very much self-portraits anyway. They're, kind of about what was going on inside of me anyway. So a lot of them ended up being self-portraits. And so I realized sometimes you're lifting up my eyelid and pulling a tab, or you're spinning things that come out of my head or whatever. So a lot of it, you are literally pulling my face apart. So it just kind of came out of that, just pull me apart was the title of it. So yeah, it's literally pulling my face apart for the interactive elements, as well as pulling out the layers of me, I guess.
Sure, the layers of you, the inner weirdo, as you mentioned, right? I love that.
Also, I'm going to keep using that inner weirdo, but at the same time, it's not so inner anymore, is it? It's pretty out there.
Well, I guess it is now. And now that we know more to the story of what you found and when you did your self-searching and those sorts of things, is that inner weirdo in your art career your superpower?
I suppose. I think everybody's inner weirdo is their superpower.
So we should all embrace it more.
For sure. I think we'd all be like happier, nicer people if we just let ourselves be who we are and stop trying to be what we're supposed to be, or these like limited definitions of what people are. Like, everybody should be weird.
Great advice. And we should all practice it more. Well, I'm going to go into a speed round with you, if that's okay. I've got a few questions to ask you, and just looking for some quick responses because there's so much to be learned from your experience. So first question is, what advice do you have for other people pursuing their passion as a full-time career, if you will?
Make a lot of art for a long time first. And if you still love it that much, I'm sure you can figure it out.
Great. If you could have done something differently in your career thus far, what would it be?
I don't know, maybe done murals earlier in life so that my back didn't hurt as much.
I did have a question about the physical. When you're doing a mural, it's got to be terribly physical. Also, I know there are videos out there of you doing some hoop dancing.
Oh my gosh, you really dug deep.
When you're not creating art, what do you do? Would you let your hair down, so to speak?
Well, I mentioned that my father was primarily a musician and he did a little art on the side. So I do a little music on the side. Nothing that I would ever play in front of people, but I enjoy playing ukulele and a little piano, and I sing, and hiking is my other big thing. That's my favorite thing to do, is hiking.
And what about the hoop dancing?
Then the hoop dancing. I haven't done that in quite a while. I had a few years obsession with hoop dancing, which if people don't know what that is, it probably sounds really weird, but it's doing all sorts of weird manipulations with a hoop on your body and off of your body. And there's all sorts of things that you never dream of could be done with this simple plastic circle. I've had a number of like multiple year little obsessions or little things that I'd learned. Like I did musical saw for a while, or like I learned sign language, but then I forgot it. Just like all these different little things of learning new things keeps things interesting.
Always learning. That's terrific. So Heather, my last question, where do you go from here? What's next for you?
Well, I'm going to continue with the interactive art for now because that's just what I most want to make. So I'm going to try to do more interactive murals. Working on doing some outreach right now to try to get more interactive mural jobs, although regular mural jobs as well. I still love doing murals. So those will be my main focuses. And I keep making the interactive art in my sketchbook. And lately, a lot of people are like, are you going to make a Pull Me Apart too? And I'm like, oh my God, the first one just came out and it was so much work. Like, give me a minute. But it might happen because I keep making more. So, who knows? It might happen.
And can you share with us where people can see your art, where people can contact you?
Yeah, well, I'm on, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok for as long as that's a thing. And I'm at Heather Clements Art, and my website, heatherclementsart.com.
Heather, it's been wonderful talking with you today. Thanks for being on the program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
We've been talking with Heather Clements, innovative artist, muralist, environmentalist, and humanitarian. Don't forget to check out heatherclementsart.com to learn more and get your copy of Pull Me Apart today. This is HarmonyTALK Podcast, presented by A.M. Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm Todd Stevens. For everyone out there, keep dreaming and doing.